Hi, I'm Jennifer Potter, Executive Director of Be Well Texas. Too many people are struggling alone these days, and alcohol and drug deaths are increasing. We started Be Well Texas to offer high-quality, science-based addiction treatment and recovery services anywhere, even at home. We provide compassionate, caring support virtually or in person. In many cases, there is no cost for treatment if you don't have insurance. Really. Welcome to Be Well Texas. We're glad you're here.
Hello and welcome to the Republic of Football podcast. I'm your host, Carter Yates, and joining me from beautiful Austin, Texas is Dave Campbell senior college writer Mike Craven. Craven, how we doing today?
Doing pretty good. Looking at some rain outside the window. We needed it. Get to save my sprinklers for one more week, which is important. So that's nice.
Yeah, that's huge. I don't have sprinklers to worry about, but we just had maybe 30 minutes of sunlight this morning. And then it was gone again. Well, it was supposed to be April showers bring May flowers, and that's not happening at all.
Yep. Calendars flipped. Like college football. Calendars messed up.
Nice. That's professional. That's a professional segue right there. We're going to talk about, Craven, your story that came out on TexasFootball.com last week, the fall of spring football. You talked to all the coaches in the state of Texas about what they see the future of spring ball looking like. And then we're going to talk about the spring transfer portal window in the second half of the show, the biggest transfers in the spring portal window. For starters, let's go. The spring portal is actually the reason that spring football is kind of dying, because the overarching problem is coaches don't know if their spring ball roster will be the same as their fall roster. They also don't want to have spring games because it puts their roster on a shelf for shopping. I believe 6 of the 13 schools didn't even have a spring game in Texas football. So, Craven, what was the overall sentiment you got from these coaches on spring football? Are they sad spring football is kind of changing and going away? Or are they just saying they need to evolve and adapt, and this is just an ever-changing sport, not necessarily a bad thing? I mean, what was the sentiment?
Yeah, I think my first takeaway from doing it and talking to all these coaches is there's such a clear split between what the Power 4 coaches think and what the G5 coaches think. And it's not just spring ball. It's like the transfer portal, NIL, revenue sharing, just depending on what side of the fence you're on and who benefits from it. Your opinion on it matters differently, right? So, I think Steve Sarkisian in Texas, they would have a spring game if they hadn't played until mid-January, back-to-back years, and played 26 games over the last couple of years. You talk to Mike Elko, and he loves the spring and wants it to stay the same, enjoys having a competitive game at the end where you kind of reward the guys for, just kind of, practicing hard all spring. Now you get to go play against each other. The crowd's there, let everybody come enjoy that. But it's easier, Tech's the same way, TCU, but it's easier to do that when you know what your roster is by and large, right? Like the guys who are leaving TCU and Tech and Baylor and Texas at the end of the spring are typically bottom of the roster players who are looking for more playing time. It's not the superstars. It's not the frontline starters. Houston lost a couple of starters to LSU and to Florida State, but by and large, the Power 4 rosters are set. So they're fine with the way spring is, the way spring games are. They'll admit that the spring portal kind of keeps it from being what it used to be, but they're by and large, I think, okay with it. It's the G5 coaches that I think are out to sea, that are just kind of lost here. Because they have guys entering the portal during practice, like it just pops up. You just had a practice. An hour later, you realize that defensive end's in the transfer portal or whatever the case may be. So I think it affects the two different divisions kind of differently. And it's just another indication of just kind of the growing chasm between the Power 4 and the G5.
Yeah, I'll take people behind the curtain. When I did my magazine stops at UTEP and Sam Houston, and Craven, I'm sure you had this too. The coaches talk about players that will be there in the fall and be cornerstones of the football team, and 2 weeks later, they're not there. So it's just a brutal time in the calendar for these G5 programs. And that's why I thought GJ Kinney's approach at Texas State was so interesting that you were writing about. He's not installing schemes. He's just evaluating his roster. Like, can you kind of unpack that for me?
Yeah, I think some of it's just the newness, right? He used the quarterback position as an example. They brought in 3 different quarterbacks from the transfer portal. He just needed to know if they could go find the open receiver and drop back. Just watch them throw it in person and kind of figure out what they have. His point was, one, you're evaluating your own roster to see what you need to go get in the spring, right? Like they feel good about 2 of their wide receivers. Well, the spring allowed them to have 10 to 15 more practices to watch all the other wide receivers. And then it's like, how much do we go into the transfer portal? How many do we need here? Do we feel good about the offensive line, or do we need to go add some guys? Do we need some dudes in the portal? So I think for one, it's the evaluation. And then the part that I found interesting that you brought up, why waste your time on third down offense and red zone defense and how we call this play and what we do that? Because you may not be here and these aren't your starters anymore, right? Come the end of the season. So I think it's just a different way to do it. He's an NFL guy. He played in the NFL. He's been part of those training camps. So I think he's okay with the OTA model. But if you told these guys, if you told Traylor, if you told Kinney, you told Morris, there's no spring portal, here's your roster, go to spring practice, I think we'd get back to what spring football used to be. Not necessarily the gladiator sport it was in the 70s and 80s, like when you see Junction Boys and all that kind of stuff. It would never be that again. But I think it'd be more of a traditional what the spring is, because then you could use your third down offense and you could start installing kind of specific stuff. Right now, it would just be a waste of time.
So you mentioned GJ Kinney, an NFL guy, and you see how college football is starting to become ever more NFL style. Well, one thing the NFL does is have joint practices between franchises in fall camp. College has never done that, but Deion Sanders at Colorado and Fran Brown at Syracuse had floated that out there. Why don't we do joint practices? Did that seem to be catching steam in Texas college football ranks?
That was really split. And not even down the line of P4 and G5. Like, Sonny Dykes was completely against the idea. Joey McGuire was completely for it, right? Like it was split even amongst the Power Four. And I get both reasonings. McGuire's point was college football is the only level of football where you don't play somebody else until the games start mattering. You scrimmage teams in middle school, high school, NFL has preseason games, but college, and the first time it starts counting is when you face somebody for the first time. So, well,
and that's why they play a 3-directional Southwest school.
Right. Right. Game. Well, and Tech has started pretty slow the last couple of years. So you get why you'd want to do that. And it breaks up fall camp. Fall camp's another one of those archaic institutions where it used to be a month long because players went home for the summer. They weren't in shape and they needed to get in shape again. These guys, this is a 365-day-a-year job for these players now. And so they arrive at fall camp ready to go in pretty good shape. And so maybe you could break up fall camp with some inter-squad practices. I think the other coaches just kind of see it, not just McGuire. McGuire's not the only one that agree. Like there's like probably 5 or 6 of the coaches I talked to that liked the idea, 5 or 6 that didn't. The coaches who didn't, their point was just you can't control how the other team practices and what they're going to do, right? Like, if my safety blows up my wide receiver on a crossing route and hurts him, well, I can get on his ass. If their safety blows up my wide receiver on a crossing route, like what's to stop them? I talked to them about, well, what if it was a P4 G5 thing where, TCU can pay North Texas to come practice and, all that kind of stuff. And I think the G5 would be interested in that because they're just looking for new ways to get some revenue sharing. But then how do you kind of keep them from not stealing some players on your roster? Like, oh man, that quarterback is really good. So
what I was thinking.
I just think there's layers to it that make it hard. And what's funny when these coaches, start complaining about like the rules and how they don't let coaches into the rooms to make these decisions, which is true. And I get that. But I talk to enough of the coaches to know they don't agree with each other anyway, right? Like everybody's got a different opinion on how this should go, what the calendar should look like, what spring ball should look like. And I found the split squad practices to be another example of that.
That internet joke that goes around, it's like when you bring your girlfriend around the homies and your one friend starts becoming a comedian all of a sudden. That's kind of how it'd be if I'm a G5 team and my cornerback starts just bawling out when we go to P4 practice. Like, where was this all of a sudden? Yeah. Huh?
You'd have to make some kind of like, and I don't know how you do this until they're under contract, but like I'm just using this as an example. If UTEP goes and practices against Texas Tech can't sign a UTEP player for 2 cycles or something, right? Like you'd have to come up with some guardrails there. I think a lot of the coaches kind of felt like the scrimmage part is out of the question. Like having a real spring game against another team, that part's not going to matter because as Mike Elko said, well, then I got a game plan. If they're keeping score, I got to win, right? Because like Texas is going to get on me if we go and we scrimmage Washington and Washington blows us out or something like that. Like, this is still college football. Like people are going to care. And if you care, then we got a game plan for it. We got to figure it all out. They don't want to do that. I think the option that we may see down the road is the split squad practice stuff where you can do some 7-on-7. You can do some 1-on-1 between the offensive line and defensive line. Kind of those low stakes, more controlled environment type things that you could do. I don't think we ever see it to where on April 30th, Texas is playing Texas State in the spring game.
So is this necessarily a bad thing for the sport that spring football is the significance of it is kind of being diminished?
I don't think so because again, spring ball was invented when football wasn't a year-round sport. You had rosters that were huge and rosters that were intact and so many players graduating that spring was for the young guys who didn't play all last fall and hadn't really played a lot of football snaps for a long time. You need to get them back into shape and you don't want them to go from December to August with no football and no install. It was like a check-in process. But now, these weight programs are year long. They do OTAs basically in the summer where they do even more install. You can stick around and be with your players more during the spring semester than you ever could before. And so I think as the rosters have shrank a little bit in terms of like who you're playing, who you're not. And then all the turnover with the portal and stuff. I think you're just rolling with 45 to 50 guys that you really trust for the most part. And then the rest is just depth and not really mattering towards the next football season anyway. So I think as that's been more the case where there's more turnover year to year where you can't really like do it the organic, like, okay, he's had 2 spring practices under his belt and a fall camp and he's ready to play. Like as that goes away and as these guys are in better and better shape, I don't think it's necessary for the 15 full-on spring practices of yesteryear. I think they still serve a purpose, but I don't think they're as valuable as they were 10, 15, 20, and definitely not 40, 50 years ago.
So how do you think this is changing how teams are running fall camp now?
Yeah, I think fall camp, you always hear old folks talk about how they're not physical anymore. We used to do 2-a-days. We used to do three a days. Like
back in my day.
Right. Used to tackle to the ground.
Back in my day, we didn't leave the field. It was sun up to sundown.
I think the part that we haven't come to grips with, and I don't mean you and I, just as a college football universe, the part we haven't come to grips yet, these guys are huge investments now beyond just a scholarship. Right? Like there's players making 7 figures on these teams, especially on the Power 4 teams. Like you're not going to go risk CJ Baxter getting hurt. Like it can still happen. He got hurt last fall camp, but it's not because some linebacker's coming and blowing him up, in a scrimmage or whatever. And so, it's still football. It's still a violent sport. You still have to hit. You still have to tackle. But we're already seeing these coaches take more and more precaution to this, kind of slow down what they do and make it more of a mental rep situation, more so than like a physical rep situation. I just don't think you need it as much anymore. Just the way that offenses are run, defenses are run. And I don't think it's that. I think we talk about it maybe more than what the coaches do because they've already come to grips with the fact that the sport's changed.
Yeah. The proverbial we love to have it both ways where we rant on these guys for not hitting and being tough anymore. But also, the most frustrating thing in the world is a star player getting injured in his fall scrimmage. Like, it is the worst. Yeah. Now, you can talk about, like, do they get injured more in the season because they aren't hitting as much in the preseason? I don't know. That's probably an unanswerable question.
Right. Right. And, we're entering the world of the payroll. And you can't risk 8% of your roster money getting lost before the season starts just because you're hitting a little bit more and you're trying to instill this level of toughness. And so it still exists. It's not like they're playing two-hand touch in practice. But I don't think if we just took a player from like 1985 and we plopped them into a 2025 practice, they'd already be like, what the hell is this? This isn't football. This isn't how we do it. And so I just think the coaches have already made these adjustments. They just want to know the rules of engagement. I think that's the thing that all these coaches want. Like, we just want to know when the portal windows are, what the scholarship limits are, how often we're allowed to practice, who we're allowed to practice against, if we're allowed to practice against somebody else. Like, every single year, it's just different. And I think that's the frustrating part. It's like a strike zone in baseball. You can make the strike zone whatever you want it to be. Just keep it consistent for 9 innings for me and the other team, and we can work with it. I think it's the same for these coaches. The strike zone just changes for them every single semester, it feels like. And so how do you kind of build any type of rhythm with how you practice and how you build a roster and all that kind of stuff? And those are the frustrations you start to hear about in the spring. Now, because of the football season, they're worried about winning a football game. In the spring, it's when they'll start talking to you more about what frustrates them.
Yeah, college football off seasons have just become one giant complaint fest.
Yeah, I do feel like a therapist sometimes on these visits.
The narratives around college football are so existential. It's kind of started to bleed into the season too, and realignment just happens in the middle of the year. But every college football season to me is so fun, and every off season is just like, what is happening to this game we loved? And I agree with a lot of the gripes. But yeah, it's just constant,
I do think, and the coaches feel like this is true. We've talked about this on previous podcasts. They feel like the spring portal is on its way out, that we will get to a point where there will be one portal window outside of some exceptions for grad transfers. If your coach leaves, like the Stanford situation or something like that. Like, I do think we'll get to where there's just one off season again. And when that happens, a lot of these issues kind of take care of themselves with just the roster turnover and not knowing who you're practicing with, not know who you're going through just spring with, and just who you need to go get. And so I do think a lot of this is just calendar headache. And as soon as somebody's in charge enough to create a real calendar that can stick, a lot of these complaints, I think, kind of go in the back burner, and we can kind of get back to some more normalcy.
So I am super excited that the coaches think the spring portal's on the way out, but why do they think it's on the way out?
Because they just think that they'll be able to legislate that in, right?
Okay.
That it's got enough momentum to where they'll be able to kind of police one of the portals out, that the rules committee will come to their senses and figure out a way. And once the settlement happens, they have a little bit more teeth, right? Like what's happened the last few years is, while this settlement in California has been kind of up in the air, they have no real way of enforcing anything. It can just be taken to court, and then it's up in the air, and then nothing can be enforced. And so once the settlement is reached, I think that they'll be able to kind of construct things in a way that is punishable is the wrong word, just enforceable. It's just like they can have some guidelines and some guardrails, and here's how it's set up. It was approved in court to be set up this way so we can move forward. And one of the first changes they want is the end of that spring portal, because, what other sport has 2 off seasons? Like, you just can't imagine if there was like another, I don't know, like a second free agency in the NFL or something, like right after the season. And it's just chaos. It's made the sport worse. I think it's made the teams worse. And I don't think it benefits the players all that much. It benefits a few of the players, but as a whole, I don't think it benefits the players all that much. And as soon as they can figure out a way to have some uniformity, I think that's good. The end result, though, is eventually, as we talk about all the time, eventually they're just going to have to be in contracts. They're going to be employees, and then we can really figure this stuff out.
Yeah, but until then, we're going to find every way we could possibly finagle this to where they're not.
Yeah, and I do think it's important that, like, this could change tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like, it can all be blown up. It's just a sense of where it's headed. And I think they feel like it's headed towards some type of normalcy and some type of ability to set a schedule. We'll see. A lot of that is dependent on the House settlement that's going on out of California right now. We've seen the roster limit thing kind of be thrown in the air, and now maybe they'll be able to grandfather some walk-ons in and not have to directly get to the 105. So who knows what the judge does? Who knows if it gets thrown out? But if all goes to plan, I think the coaches feel like they'll be able to get rid of the spring portal and they'll be able to get back to having some kind of sense of what their roster is prior to the first weekend of June.
I don't want to start we got time. We can talk about this. We don't need to make it a whole podcast, which it probably could be, but what's your opinion of the walk-on kind of going away? If it's going to be 105 roster limit, I have mixed feelings on it because I like the walk-on. I think it does have a bit of the soul of college football. Now you can talk about that's kind of old college football and a little bit archaic and not exactly what it is now, where it looks like diet NFL. But I also see you should be able to make do with 105 people on your roster, I think.
I don't know why the 105 scholarship limit has to be the death of the walk-on. You could still just have 85 scholarships and have 20 to kind of be, your walk-on program or whatever, give them a Pell Grant or something to kind of get around it. So I think some of that would be a choice, right? Some of that's just like dog-eat-dog college football world where they can't help themselves, where if they feel like there's any type of competitive advantage, somebody's going to go and take it. So then you also have to go and take it. And so I think the worry that is what if Alabama stockpiles? What if Ohio State stockpiles? And now all of a sudden there's 20 fewer scholarship players of quality for everybody else. Maybe we need to hoard the talent too, kind of like how DKR used to do back in the day, where he would recruit guys just so they couldn't go to A&M or just so they couldn't go to SMU, knowing that they would never play. And I think the scary part of that rule to me is just, again, it's the G5 Power 4 chasm, right? Sam Houston can't afford to have 105 scholarship players. It's hard to afford 85, right? UTEP the same, especially as the revenue split stuff starts happening. And so you're going to have these giant rosters. You're going to have smaller rosters, but it'll be a choice, right? If Steve Sarkisian wants to keep 20 walk-ons on, he can keep them. It'll just be at expense of a bloated roster, and we'll see kind of where that settles. But I think it's unfair, and it's, a fabric of college football to have the walk-on program. I don't know why that has to be a casualty of the new world. But like everything else, they just stick their head in the sands for so long to where somebody else outside the room has to make the decision, and then they're upset about the decision that was made. And it's like, if you would have got ahead of this 20 years ago, we wouldn't be here. And so they really have no one else to blame. But it is sad that it's gotten to this point.
Yep. 100%. So that is the fall of spring ball. Again, check out that article on TexasFootball.com, guys. Really good reporting by Craven from his college football stops. We're going to talk about, I know we just spent a whole first half of the show admonishing the spring portal. We're going to talk about it, though. Hey, we're going to cover it as long as they have it. We're going to talk about the 10 biggest transfers in the spring portal window, but I've got 5 I specifically want to talk to Craven about. Before that, got a quick ad read from Home Field Apparel. Guys, you can get all the Texas college gear at homefieldapparel.com using promo code DZTF for 10% off your first purchase. It's a little rainy right now. You got some sweaters out. You got some windbreaker jackets you can get there at Home Field Apparel. I love how they don't just do T-shirts. They got hats, trucker hats, windbreakers, you name it. Anything with your college's favorite logo on it, you can have it at homefieldapparel.com using promo code DCTF for 10% off your first purchase. That is promo code DCTF for 10% off your first purchase. All right, let's talk about the biggest transfers in the spring portal. First off, Craven, what team won the spring portal?
I think it's got to be Texas. The Longhorns add, a pair of defensive tackles, Merritt Watson and Levon Johnson. 5 total defensive tackles in the portal, 2 portal windows, but just to shore up that spot was huge. And then to get a starting tight end from Cal and a potential starting wide receiver from Stanford to add on the offensive side of the ball. Steve Sarkisian has built this roster as well as anybody in college football. He is like a master at this new age with the portal and the recruiting and how he's been able to balance both of them and use the portal to his advantage. Mason Shipley coming in as a kicker, an all Sun Belt Conference kicker, an underrated pickup as well. So Texas, I think, has to be the winner of the spring portal just because of how it's precision, right? It's like a kill shot, like a sniper, where they recruit so well that instead of having to machine gun spray the portal window the way Texas Tech has, Texas is allowed to kind of come out there and really just pinpoint a few needs and then go and attack those and get some really good football players from it.
And you see those guys will enter the portal and they're on a Texas visit like 2-3 days later. Like it is, they are on top of it. You know,
they entered the portal for that Texas visit.
Yeah. That's what I always don't understand when you enter the portal with a do not contact tag. It's like, how is that not, does no one see that's just tampering?
Right.
Like,
right.
But, you know, unanswerable questions. Who am I to say? All right. Well, you mentioned Texas Tech there. They were the portal king in Texas college football in the winter window. They also got the biggest name transfer, I think, in the spring portal window. It's outside linebacker David Bailey from Stanford to Texas Tech. You mentioned Stanford lost their head coach. So Emmett Mosley, the fifth, went to Texas. David Bailey, the outside linebacker, goes to Texas Tech. He had 8 tackles for loss and 7 sacks last year. Do you think it's going to be him and Romello Height from Georgia Tech who'll be the 2 edges, or where do you think David Bailey's a starter right off the bat? What do we think about him?
I think he's a starter right off the bat. I mean, he's starting to get mentioned as a late first-round pick in a lot of mock drafts for early 2026, right? Like he's somebody who's got NFL talent. I think he'll split there with Height. I think they'll play a lot together, especially on obvious passing down situations. I wouldn't imagine that they're like quote-unquote starters together just because on first, second down, you probably want a bigger body on the other side of that defensive line. But I think what Tech's done up front on the offensive line, the defensive line has been impressive. To be able to go add an instant impact player, probably one of the best pass rushers in the Big 12. I think that was huge in the pool. And then at wide receiver, you know, they were kind of, you know, who was going to be after Caleb Douglas and Akoy Aiken. They were a little light with experience behind that at wide receiver to go get Micah Hudson back and to go get Roy Alexander from UIW to kind of reinforce the wide receiver unit. I think was also an underrated thing that the Red Raiders were able to do. I've been addicted to stuff in the past. Like I have an addictive personality. Every time Texas Tech just adds a new guy, like that's what I think of, right? Like Joey McGuire was given this blank check, like go get your rosters good. And he just like can't stop. Like he just like a big time player enters the portal and it's like, yeah, we already bought one of those, but like, we got to go get this one too. Like they are going all in. I think that's awesome. Like we talk so much how NIL and the portal was going to make the richer get richer, you know, like the rich get richer, and this will benefit Ohio State. We saw that with the 12-team playoff, how it allowed kind of a unworthy Ohio State team to get hot at the right time and go win the championship. But it's also allowed teams like Texas Tech to like throw their hat in the mix and get some players that they would have never gotten before and get some talking points that they would have never gotten on national media. And now if they can go cash this in and get to the playoff, I think it sends out a marker to everybody else that like the water's wet. Like if you're dedicated and you want to jump in the pool, like you can go catch up and like become a power, even if historically you're not. I say kudos to them. I mean, I like to joke about it, but I think if I had that kind of money, that's exactly what I'd be doing.
Yeah, I mean, you too can have this if you make $4 billion in the oil industry.
Right. I mean, they saw SMU do it. They saw SMU do it and was like, why not us? You know, and you know, I think that's cool for some teams to kind of pop up that maybe historically aren't able to recruit this way. Well, now with some dedicated boosters, they can put together a roster that's capable of winning championships. We'll see if, you know, McGuire and co can kind of harness all this, because the downside for Tech, the upside is if it hits, they win the Big 12 and they're in the college football playoff. Like they have the best roster in the Big 12. Like I don't think that's questionable at this point. The downside is what happened to Florida State. Whereas you lose a game or two early and all of a sudden those expectations are out the window and now you got a roster of mercenaries that you can't even keep together and you end up 4-8. Yep. Like that's the downside of this.
I've heard Tom Fornelli make that point on CBS Sports, like mercenary armies don't fight as hard. And when you get them off from the transfer portal, they don't have that dying loyalty to Texas. I'm not saying those are the Texas Tech guys right now, but you saw it happen to Florida State, like you're saying.
Yeah, if you start out 5-0, 6-0, and you're in national championship conversations, and now that's easy, right? Like you can really push that button. But when things get hard, it's easier to walk away when money is the thing holding you in rather than like family or whatever, right? And like, I think that's true in all walks of life, and it's definitely true in a sport like football where you got to stick together. Like it is a battle, and as soon as you check out a little bit, like it can go bad in a hurry, and that's on McGuire's culture, and that's kind of what he hangs his hat on. So we'll see kind of how those cards get played.
I think there's a lot of pressure on McGuire heading into this year, and I think he wants it that way. Like, he would much rather have the pressure and have the resources, that comes with it. But if he prides himself on culture and he brings in an army of transfers and they start to falter, big questions entering 2026. What year is it going to be? 2026. Yeah. Huge question.
There is no question that the most pressure in the state this year to win is on Joey McGuire and Texas Tech. There is eyeballs on, and not only because of like what they've done resource wise, just how he set it up. Like, he has set up that organization differently than like historically college football has done, right? With the GM and the power he gives James Blanchard and the coordinators, bringing in two new coordinators and kind of giving them the ability to run their stuff. Like, he is doing this in a different way. And if it works, I think in a sport that's very copycatish, we're going to start seeing this more and more. If it doesn't work, will other teams be hesitant to kind of go all in and get transfer heavy and really try to win? Like last year, it didn't work for Ole Miss. If it doesn't work for Tech, if it didn't work for Florida State last year, do we see this less and less at the top where teams just aren't going to try to count on it? Conversely, though, if they go 11-1, 12-0, win the Big 12, get into the college football playoff, even getting a bye there, like I think you see a lot of other teams go, us too, right? Like, we got a rich guy too. Like, let's go figure this out. So I think it's an important year for McGuire. Obviously, year 4, you got to see it. I think he'd be on the hot seat if they didn't win well. But also, I just think as a proof of concept, a lot of what college football is going to become or not become kind of rides on some of these success stories of these teams that have gone really portal heavy.
Yeah, speaking of Cody Campbell, I've been watching Landman. I'm way late on it, I know, but it's awesome. You seen that show?
I have not yet. I have not. Newborn baby plus magazine. I have not really consumed much of anything the last 2.5 months.
Yeah, a lot of watching The Crib. That's the entertainment.
Yeah. Just dreaming of sleep, which is a new thing that I didn't think you could do.
All right, let's do it.
That's happened to me, by the way, Carter. I have had a dream about sleeping while sleeping. That is when you know
it's like Inception.
Yeah, right. And it wasn't even drug induced, which is impressive.
All right, let's go down the list here. I'm bouncing around. See, tight end Tanner Kazoil. I think that's right. Kazoil, Pennzoil. He's got the gas, I know. Wisconsin to Houston. Actually, Ball State to Wisconsin for spring ball, then to Houston. So he's one of those guys who's done a double transfer. 94 catches and 839 yards and 8 touchdowns last year. He's going to be competing with Luke McGarry, I think, from Tulsa, another transfer to Houston. What do you think about this get?
Yeah, and I think that they're going to play some 2 tight end sets, use both of those guys. One can flex out. McGarry's a pretty athletic dude. Obviously, so is Tanner, which is with those numbers that you just illustrated. And, they're just trying to amass some weapons for Connor Wigman. Steven Johnson, their wide receivers, the only returner that had really any stats from last season. The rest are going to be portal guys and, some inexperienced players that didn't have huge seasons last year that are still around. So adding any weapons to kind of replenishing that offense, I think, was priority number 1 for the Cougars because they were atrocious last year. There's no other way to put it. They were the second worst scoring offense in the country. The only team that was worse was Kent State, and they didn't win a single football game. So Houston got, out of all the Power 4 schools that we cover, Houston got pillaged the most in the spring portal. But this was a good pickup for Houston, and I'm excited to see what that offense looks like because it's going to be night and day from what it was last year. Just because there's I think 2 returning starters in that group.
So I do the conference previews for the summer magazine where you give a quick blurb about every team in the Big 12 if I'm running the Big 12. So I'll take everyone behind the curtain. I was writing the Houston part, and I said, Houston's got Connor Wegman, but also, the best secondary in the Big 12 with A.J. Halsey and Jeremiah Wilson. So, they're going to be able to pass the ball and defend the pass. And then I saw A.J. Halsey transferred. So I was like, all right, well, even without A.J. Halsey, they still got one of the best Big 12 defensive backfields with Jeremiah Wilson and Latrell McCutcheon. And then once Jeremiah Wilson happened, I was like, they got Connor Wegman, It's exciting.
Yeah, those are. I mean, those were two guys that were going to be on the All Texas team that I had to take off and find replacements for. Like you lose a safety to LSU and a cornerback to Florida State. Like that's tough. And in this year's magazine, we're going to have kind of a coaching gossip section where I've asked other coaches to kind of talk about some teams that they play and recruit against and kind of what stands out, good or bad, about them. And one of the worries about Houston is if they're going to have the money to compete in the Big 12. Like, Willie Fritz wins everywhere, but will Willie Fritz be given the resources to compete with the TCU and a Tech and an Oklahoma State and some of those programs that spend a little bit more in that conference? They have their own really rich guy in Tillman Fertitta, who owns the Rockets. But I think basketball is very important at Houston, obviously, and they're rolling with Kelvin Sampson. They're probably going to spend more on that side than other Big 12 teams do, and they are not getting a full share quite yet. From the conference, moving up from a G5. And so I think that's the big concern for Houston in the portal era is how do they keep these superstars that they develop if an LSU and a Florida State can come calling and you lose those guys. Like TCU didn't lose Josh Hoover to Tennessee, right? Like Texas Tech isn't losing any of those guys. Sawyer Robinson didn't go to Oklahoma or wherever was getting reported that he was getting looked at. But Houston's losing some of their star players. And that's a concern. That's something to watch with the Cougars over the next couple of years is if they're financially able to compete with these other peers in their conference and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go to the group of five ranks. Normally not a whole bunch of winners in the group of five with spring portal. It's kind of like a starter leaving. But Jaden Lawton going from Tyler Junior College to Texas State, a cornerback, is a great get. I think he's number 8 composite JUCO cornerback, had over 30 offers from what it looks like. So, I mean, he could almost be a starter. I think he's going to compete for it.
Yeah, I would imagine he's a day one starter for Texas State if healthy. You always kind of wonder how a guy like that kind of slips past some power fours in, especially at a need position like cornerback. But, good for the Bobcats. They got to replenish a lot, man. Texas State's lost a lot to the transfer portal. The good news is G.J. Kinney's excellent at kind of evaluation and finding those diamonds in the rough. The bad news is once they play for you for a year or two, Virginia comes calling and Virginia Tech comes calling and all those kind of schools that took a lot of their defensive linemen, losing offensive linemen to Oregon. So adding guys like Lawton, they added a few other players too that I really like. They just got to prove it, right? They just have to get there and prove it.
I can actually tell you why he slipped through the cracks a bit. I saw our friend of the program, Joe Hoyt, when he was back at Dallas Morning News. I was looking up Jaden Lawton today, and Joe had a story about him. He played solely basketball in high school until his senior season at Lovejoy and then signed with SMU. I don't know what happened when he got to SMU, went to Tyler JC after that. So now he's back, is going to be Texas State's starting quarterback from day one. So what a story there.
Yeah, they lost Joshua Eaton to Michigan State, so they had a hole to fill for sure.
Now, again, with the group of five, LJ Johnson, running back, he's done the Texas trifecta, Texas A&M to SMU to Rice. He's going to go in that Scott Abel split zone option. I don't know if that's even how you say it. It's like shotgun option. It's Oregon, right? It's the Oregon offense from back in the 2000s. But this is interesting to me because Johnson is very different from the other running backs they have, and Quentin Jackson and Tajee Atkins, who are both 5'7". Johnson's 5'10", 219. So a bit different of a back.
Yeah, he's going to look like a man in that running back room. Like he's a former 4-star kind of, on that level of 5-star type talent coming out when he was in high school, really looks the part, very athletic. Hasn't put it together, hasn't been able to kind of be the bell cow anywhere, had some flashes at SMU, but he's going to walk in the room as the most talented, as the most physically impressive, and as you mentioned, gives them a little bit of power, like somebody who can go get 2 or 3 yards in a running back room that is slight of stature.
Moving on to North Texas, defensive tackle Avion Carter goes from TCU to North Texas, and this also goes in line with today. I saw that North Texas got Louisville DT Sadiq Clements. So Skylar Cassidy bulking up on the interior.
Yeah, they had lost Braylon Charles after spring, who was going to be one of their starters at defensive end. So they had a position opening there. I don't think North Texas is done adding on the defensive side. I think they have 3 or 4 more spots left. They got some guys visiting either this weekend or next. And so, while the portal is closed in terms of entering it, even though hint, it's not, It's definitely not done in terms of adding. And I think a lot of the G5 programs that like were letting the dust settle, kind of seeing who was going to be there, who was going to be in the portal, can now go kind of finalize those last few spots that they have, go kind of be selective. Defensive line was obviously going to be a need while you transition from an odd man front to an even man front. You need different kind of bodies, especially on the edge. Avion Carter, highly rated recruit who just never made it onto the field for TCU on a consistent basis. You would think that drop down to G5 would really help him.
Any other big spring portal edition standouts for you, Craven? Those were my 5 that were the biggest for me.
Yeah, I mean, Amarion Peterson at UTSA was a big one just because, the Roadrunners have a really good passing attack, but they want to run the football, especially to help that defense and to keep some pressure off of Owen McCown. They had lost 2 running backs to the Power 5 in the portal. Kavarian Barnes went to TCU. And then Brandon High left late after the spring, followed Julian Griffin, who was their former running backs coach, to Cal. So they like what they have there in the room, but they definitely needed another body to be able to go get, a player that played for USC. I think is just another weapon that they can have offensively. Ryan Yates for TCU, I think, was a big one at safety. Give them some more depth in the secondary. So I think the spring portal for the Power 4 has been additive. For the G5, probably negative, but that hasn't kept those programs from going and adding a few players that are pretty key weapons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is unfair to know off the top of our heads. I'm trying to rack my brain of who was the best spring portal edition last year, because who are guys that you add in the spring portal and they come back and they're oh, that was actually huge and a big necessity for the season. I would say maybe Sam Houston, Jay Ducker was added in the spring window. The running back? Yeah,
I mean, the one that pops off on the top of my head, it was 2 years ago, and that was TJ Finley at Texas State, where they went and found, they had Malik Hornsby through the spring. They weren't completely satisfied with the quarterback position was. They go get Finley, and then they win 8 games. I'd imagine it's more subtle, right? It's more kind of depth, especially at the Power 4, because they're just getting to be picky. Oh, we need a 3rd offensive tackle, or, oh, we need a 4th defensive tackle, or, oh, man, we could really use an extra slot receiver. They're not superstars in the portal. And I think that also speaks to a bigger thing, and that's revenue share is going to keep the main talent out of the portal, right? Now that Illinois has money and Minnesota has money and Iowa State has money, that they can all go to that $13-15 million range. Well, they can keep their star defensive tackle that maybe Texas A&M used to go get or something, right? And maybe not the high end players. I just think in the spring, it's always going to be folks who are mostly irritated with their spot on the depth chart, not necessarily the frontline stars, unless a thing happened at Stanford where a David Bailey gets in there. Otherwise, it's a tight end here, a 3rd or 4th wide receiver there, some depth along the interior, because now it's not so much of a haves and have-nots. Even the middle to lower pack P4 teams have some money to spread around to keep those rosters intact.
Yep. And so next year will be the first year, right, with revenue sharing?
Yeah, and I think they're spending next week's cash now, right? Where they're promising some stuff to these players to keep them on campus, assuming that rev share is coming down the pipe.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for the show today. Craven, any final thoughts through the door here?
Yeah, no final thoughts. Big week or two for us on the magazine front. So we're going to have our heads buried in that. I'm sure we'll hear more and more from the portal, just latest additions. Putting out that post-spring FBS power poll we discussed last week. Made some changes based on our conversation. So don't ever say I'm not flexible. So yeah, I mean, just May is kind of a crazy month for us as we turn in copy and then edit copy and stuff like that. So as everyone else kind of goes to bed for college football for a couple of years, goes into hibernation, we're kind of still in it. So exciting few months. We got new brand stuff coming down the pipe in the summer. So exciting time.
Yeah, a lot of exciting stuff happening here at Dave Campbell's. So for senior college writer Mike Craven, I am your host, Carter Yates, signing off for the Republic of Football podcast. Podcast over.